Hey class, in this lab we're going to be going over character animation. So we'll be using the designs from the previous lab on character design to create sprite sheets with animations for the various states that the player will have in the game. That includes things like the idle state, walk, jump, dying or a game over, getting hit by an obstacle or enemy, and also talk or attack animations. You might also come up with other animations that might be useful in a game. You could also talk to your collaborators, developers, or designers about other things that might be useful to have as character animations. Then we'll go over how to export sprite sheets from Piskel. This process is similar in Sprite. For other programs, you might need to find a tutorial or something that goes over how to make a sprite sheet. If you need help with that, let me know and we can find something. Once we have those sprite sheets, we're going to add the animations into a Godot scene. So we'll add the sprites into the sprites folder in the Godot project and then set up the animated sprite nodes in Godot to play the animations. Of course, after that, we'll do some documentation, taking some screenshots or video to post on the Open Lab. I've posted some resources here as well. You can see there's some tutorials that use Sprite, which is very similar to Piskel in functionality, and a couple of other videos that go over more in-depth ways of creating animations. You'll see the animations that I created for this demo are very simple. I wanted to prioritize simplicity and small file size in order to make it easy to understand what's going on in the demo. If you want more in-depth information or tutorials about creating like a full walk cycle or other types of animations, those resources are a good place to start. And I also recommend just looking at stuff on YouTube. If you have questions about whether something would work with Godot or with our games, feel free to send me links to stuff that you're interested in and we can look at it together. This animation process is important because all of the animations for other parts of the game, like objects, enemies, items, checkpoints, all of these other things that we might add to the game are going to use the same process. So we're going to go over all the details in this lab, and then hopefully we'll be able to apply the same process to future labs in the class. Okay, let's get started. Quick note, you may notice that some of these tutorials are for Sprite and other software. The concepts that you'll see in these tutorials will apply the same in Piskel or Sprite or Photoshop or whatever you happen to be using. So don't worry if you're using a different editor, you should still be able to follow along with the tutorials. So let's open Piskel and get started. So we're going to start in Piskel, and of course we want to save a file. And to start, I'm going to make a default file where I just draw one frame of the character. And so that way I can always come back to this file to start a new animation if I want to. I'm going to go to the desktop and find my folder for MMP 270, and I'll create a new folder for this project so I can save all of my original Piskel files and I can come back and edit them if I need to later. So let's make sure we have the right size. 32 by 32 looks good. And I'm going to want to recreate the character design that I did in the previous lesson. So I'm going to start by just drawing a simple shape with the triangle base and the sort of long rectangle for the head. And I'll turn on my onion layer so I can trace over that. And I'll choose a color that I want to use for my character. I can always change this later. And so I'm just going to draw the head and start drawing the features. And so this is going to be my default sprite. And I'm basically just going to draw the character here. I'm just going to have one frame. It won't be an animation at all. But I want to have something that I can always come back to. If I create an animation where I make a lot of changes and then I'm not happy with how it turns out, I want to be able to come back to my character and start from scratch. And I encourage you, as you're doing the animation and design, to be very free in your drawings and try lots of different animations and never be afraid to just start from scratch. We should spend more time drawing and less time trying to fix a drawing that we might not like or might not be the right size or right color. So with Piskel and pixel art in general, it's a lot easier just to completely start over again and not worry too much about trying to make everything perfect the first time. So I think I need a little more room to draw, so I changed the size of my art, but what I did is I scaled the art that I already had up so I could keep drawing on it. And so this is a little bit better in terms of the amount of detail that I have, and I can always scale this down later if I need to. So I'm just going to basically start with a really simple version of the character with just default eyes, and I don't really need a mouth. I don't know if my character is going to be talking too much or not, but I just need some eyes so we know where the face is, and some arms and some legs. And we'll just create a default stance that we can return to when we create other animations. So now that I'm done with my default pose, I want to start on my idle animation. I have to be careful to make sure that I'm saving a new file here, otherwise I will write over the file that I had. So when I go to rename the file, make sure to click Save As and type in your new file name. Otherwise, you may be editing the file that you already have. Starting with my idle animation, I'm just going to delete the guidelines that I had in my default pose, and I'm going to duplicate my default pose frame, and then I'm just going to erase the eyes and just draw some blinking eyes. So this is really simple. You may want to play around with this a little bit more to make a more interesting idle animation. Maybe the player is breathing or moving up and down a little bit. But I just want to keep things as simple as possible for these demonstrations, and also show you that a couple frames can go a long way as far as adding life to your character. So one thing that I want to test is to see if I'm only blinking every 5 frames or so, what that would look like. But when I export my image, I only need the 2 frames of my animation. I can change the animation in Godot to reuse those frames. So to save space, I'm just going to use those 2 frames. Let's export our image. So we're going to go to export, and we're going to use the PNG and the sprite sheet option. Then we'll just click download, and that's going to download our image, and we just have to make sure to put that in the right folder. And now we're good with our idle animation. We have the exported PNG, which we can use in our Godot game later. So let's move on to our walk cycle. You can see I actually made a mistake here. I changed the title to character walk, but you'll notice when I make a change, it goes back to character idle. It's because I didn't click the Save As button. This doesn't end up being the end of the world. I was able to go back and recover the idle animation after I made the walk animation. But to save yourself the headache, make sure to always save your new file with the correct name. So for my walk animation, what I did is I erased the arms and legs, but I left everything else the same. After I erased the arms and the legs, I duplicated the frame so I wouldn't have to erase them again after I drew them. And then I started drawing. And I made a really, really simple 2-frame walk animation here. The only thing I really did to make it look realistic is I made sure to make the leg and arm going in opposite directions. So in the first frame, the right leg is down and the left arm is up. And so that will make it look like the character is moving back and forth. This is about as simple and foolproof as a walk animation can be. My legs are just going up and down, and my arms are just moving back and forth. I didn't want to spend a lot of time here, so you can look at the resources for more detailed walk cycles if you're interested in that. For our game, this will work fine. And it'll be very efficient because we'll just have 2 frames that we have to worry about. Then I spent some time adjusting the eyes so that the player would be sort of looking in the direction that they're walking. This isn't really necessary, but it adds a little bit of detail that may make things look more realistic. At that point, I was happy with the animation that I have, and so I decided to move on to my next animation. And this is the point I realized that I hadn't saved my animation correctly. So now I saved this one to character walk, and I was able to export this again. So I'm just downloading the sprite sheet the same way. And I was able to recover my character idle animation. So then I moved on to the character jump animation. So again, I took the animation that I was working on and I saved it as character jump to create a new sprite. Then I erased the arms and the legs. And then I made a few copies of this. For a good jump cycle, I'm going to need at least 3 or 4 frames for this because a jump takes a little bit more setup than just walking or idle. Once I have all the blank frames I need, I'll start drawing the arms and legs in different positions. So starting with the first frame of my jump, I'll draw the legs bending a little bit as the character prepares to jump. And the arms will be sticking out and down a little bit, so the character is balancing and getting ready to jump. Now I'll turn the onion skin on so I can compare one frame to the previous frame. In this frame, the jump will have started, so the arms will be going up and the legs will be going out a little bit. In the next frame, the jump will be moving from going up to going down, so the arms will go all the way up and the legs will go out. At this point, I realized that I hadn't really been drawing hands on my characters, so no big deal. I just went back to some of my previous animations and made sure to draw hands like I had in my first original animation. So that way I can be consistent across the different animations. For the last frame, the character's legs are bent again as they hit the ground, and the arms are going out to balance the character. So here we have a 4-frame jump animation. Certainly you could make it longer or shorter, but I think this will be good for the demonstration purposes. And so from here, I'll move on to export my sprite sheet. So again, I'll go to the export menu and choose PNG and choose sprite sheet. And I'll save it in the same folder with the rest of my animations. Next, we need an animation for when the character dies. So in some games, your character might not die and you could skip this animation. But most games, the character can probably die if they get hurt too many times or fall off of a cliff or something else happens. So we want to have an option when the character dies or we have a game over. And we just want to represent that. I'm just going to draw a really short animation here. Again, this is going to be simple just for the sake of demonstration, but I encourage you to explore more interesting ways to express the game ending or the character losing or other things that might happen in the game. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to do a few frames where the character is falling over and dying. So now that I'm done with my animation, I need to make sure to export my sprite sheet. And so I'm going to go to the export tab, go to PNG and export a sprite sheet. So that's just 3 frames, so pretty short, but we will play with that in Godot just so it'll be clear to the player what's happening. Let's make a similar animation for if the player gets hurt. So in this case, the player doesn't die, but they do register some sort of loss of a life or loss of points or something like that. So we just want to have an animation to go along with that as well. Once we finish that animation, we have to export again. And let's save another animation. And for this one, I'm just going to do a quick character throwing action. So we probably won't get to this for a few lessons, but we might want our character to be able to throw projectiles or do some sort of action. So let's add an animation just so we have that for later. We can always come back and add animations once we come up with new functionality or new things that the character can do. But since we're here, let's do a quick throw animation that we could use in a later video. So I renamed this to character attack. So I realized it could be like a punch or a throw or something else as well. We might want to use a more generic term if the character can do different things. This is something that you may also have to collaborate with a developer. You could say, hey, what can the player do in this game? And then you'll draw some sprites to make those actions possible. For now, we're just creating some default different actions, but in the future, you'll want to decide what the character can do and then draw those animations. Or if you're collaborating, you might discuss with your collaborators what you want the character to be able to do and then work on the animations after you decide. I also did a quick talking animation. This was actually a lot harder than I thought it would be, but I wanted to have something for the RPG lessons that we'll do later when we add character dialogue. So I tried a quick talking animation. I basically just changed the mouth a few different ways. It doesn't look great, but it will at least give us some sense that the character is talking when we get to that lesson. In the second half of this video, we'll go over how to put our animations into Godot. If you want to share your animations with another student who's doing some development or designing, you may want to add all of the animations into a zip file. This will compress the animations and make the overall size much smaller, so it'll be easy to share on Discord or on email. Okay, so now that we've created all our animations, we need to put them into a Godot project. So we're going to learn how to create the animations inside of Godot. So you might already have a Godot project with a player inside of it. If you do, go ahead and use that player. You can also download the artist default folder, which is a project that has some stuff built into it already that you can use to get started. So it has all the project settings and different things that you might need. If you have a game set up already, you can use that. But if you're using the artist default, let's drag that into our artist folder. And then we'll just grab our character animation sprites and put them inside our Godot project. So again, if you're using your own game, feel free to just put your sprites in there. But if you need a project starter, use the artist default and go to the sprites folder. You see there's some stuff in there, but we need to add in our character animations. Then you can open your Godot project. So regardless of which project you're using, the first thing that we want to do is go in and make sure that the sprites were imported correctly. You can see the filter is off, which is what we want for pixel art. That default is already set in this default project. So let's go into the default scene, and you can see there's a few platforms there, which we will use to help us visualize the animations. And then that blue bean looking shape in the middle is where our player will be once we add in our animations. So let's click on the scene icon next to the player to open the player scene. And then we'll select the animated sprite. You can see there's a little warning there, and that's because we haven't set up the sprite frames. So we have to click on the frames and then create new sprite frames, and then just click those new sprite frames to open up our animation panel. So we can see the list of animation. I'm gonna go ahead and delete the default animation. And let's take a quick look at the script and see how the animations are named in the script. We're not going to change anything here, but if we scroll down a bit, you'll see a comment that says update animation, and you can see the names of the animations that will play. So we have a jump, a walk, and an idle animation. And the code determines when those animations are played. If you're interested in learning more about how that code works, I recommend looking at the programming intro lab. So we want our animation names to match what we see in the script. We can change the script, but for now it's easy to just create animations with the same name. And the names are case sensitive. So if there's a capital W in walk or a capital J in jump, then we need to use the same syntax in our animation names. So let's go back to our 2D view and click on the animated sprite and click on the sprite frames again to bring up our animation window. So let's start with our three basic animations: the idle animation when the player is not moving, the walk animation when the player is moving back and forth, and the jump animation when the player jumps. So for each one of those animations, I'm just going to hit that plus button. This will add these animations that we'll be able to select and play in our code. So let's create the animations now. You can see the toolbar for the animation frames. We're going to click the icon that looks like a little waffle to add a sprite sheet. And then let's find our character idle. So this animation is just 2 frames. It's very simple. To select those frames, we need to make sure that Godot knows how many to cut horizontal and vertically. So we only have 1 cell horizontally, 2 vertical. We can select those 2 and then click add 2 frames. So you may have to play around with that to get it to match, but when you see that the little squares match your sprite sheet, that means that you've got it right. You may not see the animation in the main viewer window. We have to go over to the animation properties and make sure we have the one that we're editing selected, and then make sure playing is on. And then we'll see a preview of that animation. So the idle animation runs pretty fast, and that's because we just have 2 frames. But I actually want to stick on the frame with the open eyes for a bit longer. So let's just copy and paste that frame a bunch of times. Now there are more frames before we blink the eyes, so we get a different pacing to the animation. So with only 2 frames that we drew, we have a little bit of a longer animation. So when I talked about only using the frames that we needed when exporting earlier when we were making our art in Piskel, that's what I meant, is that we can repeat those frames as many times as we need to create a longer animation. There's a couple other parameters we can set: the speed to increase or decrease the overall speed of the animation, and then the loop, which is on by default. And we do want our idle animation to loop, so that's good. So let's preview that. One note, if I play the player scene, we don't really see anything. We need to go back to the default scene, and then we can see the player inside of a scene. So you can see it's only playing the idle animation because that's the only one we created, but we can see that idle animation is working when the player is not moving. So let's go to our walk animation next. We're gonna hit that waffle again, find our walk sprite sheet. That's another one that's just 2 frames. So it's just 1 horizontal unit and 2 vertical units. We'll select those frames and click add. And this one should basically be fine as 2 frames. We may want to adjust the speed to match the speed of the character. Let's add our jump frames. So we'll click on the jump animation, click the waffle again. This one is 2 by 2. So we will change it to 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, and then click add 4 frames. And for the jump, we may want to slow it down a little bit. And we also don't want it to loop. It would look a little weird if we were just jumping over and over again when we were in the air. So now we can preview that jump and walk animation. The jump might be a little slow, but you can see we get all those frames across the length of the jump. And then the walk maybe looks a little fast. Let's see if we make our character faster. That looks pretty good. We might want to adjust the speed of the walk to match the speed of the character. It is just 2 frames, so it may not be that accurate ultimately. That looks pretty good to me. I might want to speed up the jump just a little bit. It's a little too slow. So that looks pretty good for our basic idle, walk, and jump animations. I also want to test the animations that we created for the game over or dying, and also the player getting hit by something. So let's throw in a couple little obstacles. I'm just going to go to my default scene and click the scene node, click on the link button, and find my obstacle simple. This is something that you'll cover when you do the obstacle lab, so you probably don't have this at this point. You can just use the default obstacles that I created in the demo scene. At this point, if you are using your own project and you don't have an obstacle, you may need to look in the default project or the assets folder, which you can download from the labs page, and find the obstacle scene, obstacle script, and obstacle art. You can also just skip this part and do it later when you get to the obstacle labs. So now let's take a quick look in the code as to where these animations occur. You can see these events where we have the hit and the character dies. And so let's make sure to name our animations to match those 2 events. So it's just capital HIT and capital DIES. So let's build those animations real quick. I'm going to do hit first. There's 3 frames here, but it's a 2 by 2 grid. So I do 2 horizontal and 2 vertical, add 3 frames, and then I'm going to turn the loop off. So when we get hit, we just want to see the animation once, and then we'll go back to another animation. And the dies animation is pretty much the same thing. It's 3 frames again, 2 by 2 grid, but we just select 3 frames. Your animations may be more complicated, so it may take you a little more time to add them in, but it should be basically the same process. So now we've got our hit and dies animation set up. Let's see the hit a couple times, and if I get hit enough in the scene, I'll die. So that's also built into the default scene manager in the scene. If you don't have that in the project you're working on, you can add it in real quick or just leave it for later. So we made a couple other animations that we won't preview today. I think this is a good enough overview of the process that when you get to that point in your game development, you'll be able to add those in as well. Okay, we are just about done. So let's get a couple screenshots for the Open Lab. So it's a little bit hard to screenshot animations. I'm just gonna try my best. You could try screenshotting the whole screen and then editing the result, or you could record a video, whatever you prefer. So let's just get some documentation and we'll go over to the Open Lab. I know this was a long lab and we covered a lot of information, but this is going to put us in a good place for future labs. We'll already understand how a lot of this stuff works, and in the future, we can spend most of our time just working on the art and then throw it into Godot with these concepts already under our belt. So let's choose the character animation category and give it a title. And you may want to just say what sprite animations you're adding, or if there's any context or inspiration that you want to add. And once you've got that, let's go find our sprite sheets and we can add another gallery. So we can select all of the sprite sheets. I hit Command 2 there to see a different view in the Finder, so it'd be easier to get all of those files. You can see that the sprite sheets look a little weird because they're different sizes, but if you just turn off crop image in the gallery settings, then you will see the whole image. We can also add little captions to the images if we want to say which image is which animation. And if you have other animations, you may want to add more animations or play around with different ideas. Feel free to add as many animations or sprite sheets here as you want to. We can't see the animations, obviously, like if it was an animated GIF or something like that. So if you want to add that as well, feel free. But this is a nice way to show what we've worked on and for other students to get a sense of what your process looked like and any things that you might have added in here. So let's write another sentence to say, here's our animations in Godot. And let's just drop in a couple of those screenshots just so we can see what it looks like in a Godot scene. We're still kind of at the beginning of our process of learning Godot, so we don't have a lot of stuff in there, but we can at least get a little bit of a sense of what it looks like. Let's preview that post, and that looks pretty good to me. So let's go ahead and publish, and you should be done.